Hello, readers by eyes and by ears. This is Mari Chan, and welcome back to another reading session on my YouTube channel. Today, we are continuing the reading of Stars of Chaos, Volume 1, also known as Prologue, and we are reading chapters 5 through 8. I hope you all enjoy. Chapter 5, Xiu-niang. Straining to stand on his tiptoes, Chang'eng looked over the crowd and shouted, "Shi Liu!" Again, there was no response. The crowd of people chasing after the giant kite swelled. Some cheered, while others cried, "It's coming!" Still others yelled indignantly, "Stop pushing!" Buffeted by the crowd, Chang'eng grew increasingly furious. Seething with anger, he bellowed, "Yifu!" The sea of people surged alongside the underground river. In no time at all, Chang'eng's forehead was drenched with sweat from struggling against the tide as he searched for his godfather. What little excitement he had felt from seeing the giant kite had vanished entirely. Just how many years would he shave off his life dealing with such a troublesome godfather? Shan Shiliu really is just a wastrel with nothing better to do, Chang'eng thought angrily to himself. He could have done anything on such a sweltering day, yet he insisted on coming out to join the crowd. At that moment, someone let out a piercing scream. "Stop pushing! Someone fell in the river!" Chang'eng instinctively looked in the direction of that scream, but all he could see was that the crowd by the river had become frenzied. "My God! How did someone fall in? Go fetch the guard on duty, quick! Step aside, let me through! I can't get out, it's too—" Chang'eng was about to make way for the people trying to squeeze their way out of the crowd when he distantly heard someone say, "Master Shi Liu, be careful!" A chill ran down Chang'eng's spine. Wondering whether he had misheard due to overwrought nerves, he hurried forward and grabbed hold of one of the people trying to squeeze their way back from the riverside. Who fell? Was it Shan Shi Liu? Who could say whether that person heard Chang'eng's question clearly or not? He nodded, distracted. "I think so. Just let me out first." A ringing sound roared through Chang'eng's ears. Bathed in the searing wave of heat from the giant kite, his back broke out into an incongruous layer of cold sweat. Sucking in a deep breath, he shoved people aside as he sped like the wind to the bank of the river. He stumbled the last few steps and only managed to steady himself by grabbing hold of the railing. Craning his neck, he looked down in a panic to find that there was indeed someone floundering desperately in the water. The surface of the underground river lay some 20 meters below ground level. The river was so deep that it was impossible to see the bottom at a glance. Yet, even so far below, it gave off a deep chill. As towering white waves sliced through the water, the person in the river seemed like a bit of duckweed floating helplessly along, with no way to exert any force against the currents. It was impossible to hear any movement, much less identify who had fallen. Chang'eng stripped off his outer robe in a single motion. "Let me through! Excuse me, let me through!" "You can't just jump in like that," someone shouted from beside him. "Someone, hurry, get this kid a rope!" A member of the crowd hastily shoved a length of rope into Chang'eng's hands. Gripping the rope, Chang'eng glanced up at the giant kite looming overhead before diving down into the water without hesitation. "Hold on tight! Hurry up, hurry up! Once the giant kite comes, they'll get swept away." The incoming ship raised a wave nearly 2 meters high. Chang'eng had only just jumped into the water when he was struck in the chest by the surging tide, the pressure shoving his breath back down his throat. He choked on a mouthful of water and was nearly swept away, hastily tightening his grip on the rope cast down from the riverbank above. He scrubbed a hand over his face. The sound of rushing water coupled with the roar of the giant kite as it slowed thundered in Chang'eng's ears. His entire field of vision was filled with white waves. Faintly, he could hear the voices of people shouting from the shore. "Stop feeding him rope! The giant kite's coming! Hurry up and pull that kid out! We're out of time! Wait!" Chang'eng yelled, but the water was so loud he couldn't even hear himself shouting. He could only wave frantically at the people standing ashore and signal them to not pull in the rope. At the same time, he was doing all he could to swim toward the place where the crashing waves were most ferocious. In the maelstrom of the water, someone grabbed onto his fumbling hand. Chang'eng had no time to think. Locking his own hand tightly around that person's wrist, he pulled them into his arms. Before he could see who it was, the giant kite was already bearing down on them with a deafening rumble. The people standing ashore had waited as long as they dared. The course rope tightened sharply around Chang'eng's waist. There was a powerful tug, and Chang'eng's body suddenly felt weighed down as the men on the riverbank worked together to haul them out of the water. Only when he broke through the surface did Chang'eng sense that the body in his arms was too light. Hastily blinking away the water clinging to his lashes, Chang'eng realized with a flash of understanding that the person he had dragged out of the water wasn't Shen Shiliu at all, but a 12-year-old kid. It was that sham of a girl, Xiu-niang. A long bugle call rang out from the giant kite, piercing Chang'eng's eardrums. Ears ringing, Chang'eng had no time to think. With a great shout, he pushed the half-drowned Xiu-niang ashore. The crowd on the riverbank clamored and cried as they pulled the pair of youths out of the water, but they were too slow. Chang'eng's legs were still dangling beyond the bounds of the riverbank, yet the giant kite was gliding relentlessly past, a set of its fire pinions on the verge of grazing his calf. Even before the fire pinions made contact, Chang'eng felt a scorching wave of heat whip past, scouring, searing lines of pain into his flesh. "You mustn't touch the fire pinions! Look out!" Right then, a pair of pale hands reached out, weaving through the shrill screams of the crowd. They grabbed Chang'eng by the arm and swung him bodily up in a high arc through the air. The onlookers cried out in alarm and ducked out of the way. Chang'eng felt himself nearly go flying, only to fall into someone's arms. He sucked in a deep breath, and a medicinal fragrance immediately filled his nostrils. Chang'eng snapped his head up, the tip of his nose nearly brushing Shen Shiliu's sharply pointed chin. Shen Shiliu's face was like the sky before a storm. "I look away for a single second, and you've gone and made a name for yourself as a troublemaker." Feeling as though the words had been stolen right out of his mouth, Chang'eng had no response. "There are so many soldiers standing on the shore," Shen Shiliu said angrily. "Was there any need for a brat like you to jump to the rescue?" Chang'eng looked at him in silence. His heart, which had been caught in his throat, crashed back into his chest, and the blood that had been dammed up there flooded back into his numb extremities. Only now did he manage to spit out that first gulp of air, which had been choking him and turning all his insides upside down while Shen Shiliu berated him. His legs felt so weak he could barely stand. Xiu-niang had already been carried off to the side. After coughing up some water, he was slowly beginning to regain consciousness. Seeing that the child hadn't suffered any major injuries, Shen Shiliu picked Chang'eng up by the scruff of his neck and shouldered his way out of the crowd. He frowned deeply as he yanked Chang'eng along, so that the youth could only stumble after him. As he walked, he scolded him harshly. "You would have lost half your leg if you touched those fire pinions before they cooled down. Were you planning on limping around for the rest of your life? You arrogant little brat!" Chang'eng shivered as he returned to his senses. Before he could get in a word edgewise, he had already listened to Shun the Deaf hypocritically accuse him of wrongdoing. Suddenly, all the anger in his heart boiled over. Struggling to raise his head, he yelled, "I thought you were the one who fell in the river." Shen Shiliu raised one long and slender brow. "Enough with the excuses. Why would a grown man like me fall into the river for no good reason?" Chang'eng was completely speechless. Not only had his concern for his godfather caused a mess, but his pure heart had been taken for donkey's offal. A surge of heat spread from his neck up to his ears, leaving behind a swath of red. He couldn't tell if he was embarrassed or angry, but regardless, a demonic fire burned in his gut, unquenchable by earthly waters. "All right, enough with all the ruckus." Shen Shiliu stroked Chang'eng's long, damp hair. Then he removed his outer robe and wrapped it around Chang'eng's body. "It's too chaotic here. I'll stop lecturing you for now, so let's hurry home so you can get changed. Be careful you don't catch a cold." How magnanimous of him! Seething with anger, Chang'eng jerked out of Shiliu's hold, his movements so violent his palm accidentally smacked something hard in Shiliu's sleeve. Pain shot through the bones of his hands. "Oh, that's the rouge I bought just now," Shun Shiliu said. "Remember to give this to your mother." Chang'eng, where are you going?" Chang'eng didn't wait for him to finish, but left him behind without another word. In all honesty, Chang'eng knew he was throwing a silly tantrum. He had acted purely on presumption, based only on words overheard in the crowd. He hadn't even seen who it was that had fallen before jumping frantically into the water. It was little wonder he was being scolded by his godfather. But the thought of this lecherous dallier picking out rouge while Chang'eng had been panicking and anxious made his chest ache with fury. It was impossible for him to tamp down his burning anger. Shun Shiliu rubbed his nose awkwardly, baffled by Chang'eng leaving him behind. He could only chalk it up to the fact that all boys eventually reach a temperamental age. As a first-time father, Shun Shiliu felt a bit vexed. He thought to himself, "Had I known this would happen, I would have held off on giving him the iron cuff until tomorrow. How am I going to appease him now that he's acutely mad?" He stood a short distance from the riverbank, with his hands clasped behind his back. The giant kite had already sailed past him with a low rumble, the lights on the stern flickering as the underground river drew closed in its wake. After brooding a short while, Shun Shiliu stared at those stern lights. Unlike when he usually gazed into the distance, his eyes weren't the least bit unfocused. His brow slowly creased in a frown. With a flicker of movement, he disappeared into the crowd like a fish slipping into water. His footsteps made no noise as he moved with incomparable speed, nothing at all like one who was half blind. Chang'eng made his way home in stuffy silence. Warm wind wafted over the ice-cold river water, soaking his body, calming him slightly. The anger suffusing his face gradually faded. Chang'eng's eyes bore a strong resemblance to Xiu-niang's. There was an intensity to his features that was unusual among those who hailed from the Central Plains, yet he didn't quite look like a foreigner either. Whatever the case, he was uniquely handsome, his face both striking and distinctive. The moment Chang'eng stepped over the threshold of his home, he saw the old kitchen maid standing on her bound feet and peering out toward the door. Shocked by his wretched appearance, she cried, "Ayo, what happened to you?" "Nothing," Chang'eng said weakly. "Someone fell in the river. I helped them since I happened to be there and ended up getting soaked." The old kitchen maid shuffled alongside him with tiny steps, nattering on. "The madam said to prepare a late dinner. I think she means to wait for the master to come home first. Oh, right. She asked that you go see her in her room when she got back. She said she wants to have a private chat between mother and son." Chang'eng paused, his shoulders tensing unconsciously, then nodded with a blank expression. He returned to his rooms to change into dry clothes, soaking as he carefully folded Shun Shiliu's outer robe and set it aside. Only then did he take out the box of rouge out of his sleeve and make his way over to Xiu-niang's living quarters. The old kitchen maid was deeply curious about this mother and son's bizarre relationship. However, she didn't dare ask questions and could only crane her neck as she crept after Chang'eng at a short distance. Upon arrival at Xiu-niang's door, Chang'eng took a moment to carefully adjust his attire. His expression was so solemn, it was as though he was about to meet a formally invited guest. Only when he was sure his appearance was perfectly in order did he knock on Xiu-niang's door and say with deference, "Mother?" The woman's cold and cheerless voice drifted out from within. "Come in." Chang'eng pushed open the door. After stepping over the threshold, he glanced back for a brief moment, meeting the eyes of the old kitchen maid who was peeking at him from afar. Startled, she hastily looked away. When she turned back again, the door had already closed, revealing nothing. Xiu-niang's quarters were dimly lit. The blinds of the windows facing the sun had been drawn shut. As if averse to the light, Xiu-niang sat before a vanity mirror in a dark corner of the room. Glimpsing her from behind, Chang'eng wondered whether she had taken the wrong medicine that day. She was dressed in a pale yellow routine and had fashioned her hair into a style worn by young unmarried women. The years had treated her kindly. In the weak light of the room, where the shadows easily hid the slight wrinkles at the corners of her eyes, she genuinely looked like a 16-year-old girl. Chang'eng was about to call out to Xiu-niang when she cut him off. "There's no one else here, so stop calling me mother. Did you buy the rouge?" Chang'eng swallowed back the second "mother" sitting on the tip of his tongue and allowed the acid of his stomach to dissolve the syllables down into an oozing mess. He stepped forward and lightly tossed the rouge box, still warm from his hands, onto Xiu-niang's dressing table. "The color is so pretty and bright." Xiu-niang finally conceded a stingy smile. She dipped a finger into the box to pick up a bit of rouge and smeared it over her pale lips. After cheerfully examining her reflection in the mirror, she asked, "Do I look pretty?" Chang'eng stood to the side with an expression of cool indifference and did not say a word. However, in the privacy of his own mind, he marveled at this rare occurrence. Why would Xiu-niang call him here? Perhaps she was bored. As he thought this, one of his eyes twitched slightly. Chang'eng at once found himself overcome with a mysterious and ominous feeling. "Moving forward," Xiu-niang said, "you can stop calling me mother around other people too. You see, our destiny as mother and son finally comes to an end today." As she spoke, she lifted her gorgeously painted face and reached out her pale, slender hands as if intending to straighten Chang'eng's collar. Chang'eng jerked away. "What do you mean?" Chapter 6. Curse. Xiu-niang smiled and withdrew her hands, unbothered. Her lips were stained with the rouge bought by Shen Shiliu. The color added a touch of glamour to her pale and dignified face, making her look like a flower that had quenched its thirst with blood. "I know you've always had your suspicions. Since we have the chance today, we might as well clear things up. It's true that I did not give birth to you," Xiu-niang said. "Now that that's out in the open, do you feel a little better?" The corner of Chang'eng's eye twitched slightly again. He was still young, after all. He had yet to develop the shrewdness required to keep emotions from showing on his face. Regardless of how good a friend or how dear a teacher, there was no one in the world, not even a father, who could replace a mother. It wasn't that Chang'eng did not long for a mother, but there were times when refusing to accept one's fate, despite knowing very well that it was unchangeable, was too bitter to bear. If he clung to hope, even he would find himself pitiful. There were countless times when Chang'eng had thought there was no way Xiu-niang was his birth mother, yet now that he had received such an unsurprising answer, his heart was completely hollow. His feelings were difficult to describe. The apprehension Chang'eng felt slowly intensified. Warily he asked, "Why are you telling me this now?" Turning back to the mirror, Xiu-niang examined her face. Perhaps it was because she had applied too much powder, but her complexion seemed a little bit wan. She carefully scraped out more rouge and daubed it evenly onto her cheeks. "Chang'eng is the milk name that I gave you," Xiu-niang said. "There's a saying amongst the people of the Central Plains. In the east there is Qiming, and in the west there is Chang'eng. Emerging at dusk, Chang'eng is a deeply inauspicious star, giving rise to war and bloodshed. With the most noble and most filthy blood flowing through your veins, you were born to be a terrible freak of nature. No name could be more suitable." "Wasn't I born after you were captured and raped by mountain bandits while stranded in Shanxi?" Chang'eng said coldly. "2 hands aren't enough to count the number of men who had a hand in fathering me. The son of a prostitute and a nest of bandits. How exactly do I have noble blood?" Xiu-niang's entire body stiffened. She didn't look back, but the rouge could mask the pallor of her face as a flash of pain flickered through her expressive eyes. Yet she suppressed it quickly, the emotion melting away into a sea of mad serenity. Chang'eng's earliest memories was of the bandits' hideout high in the mountains. Xiu-niang would always lock him in the cabinet that reeked of mold. Through tiny cracks in the rotted wood, the young Chang'eng watched the drunk bandits barge into the room. Those brutish men would either beat her or have their way with her before Chang'eng's eyes. At first, the bandits had kept an eye on Xiu-niang, but when they saw how weak and pliant she was, they gradually relaxed their guard. Later, they even allowed her to go out and serve food alongside the other servant women in the mountain stronghold. In the end, Xiu-niang poisoned the well in several hundred jars of wine. Heaven only knew where she got her hands on such poison. That day, she filled a small bowl with poisoned well water and offered it to Chang'eng. But when he drank, she seemed to regret it and shoved her fingers down his throat in a desperate attempt to bring the poison back up. Xiu-niang had stuffed the half-dead Chang'eng into a small bamboo basket, which she carried on her back. She had a steel knife in her hands, and every time she encountered a bandit who had yet to breathe their last, she stepped forward and finished them off. In Chang'eng's memory, she wore a dress dyed red with blood as she doused everything with kerosene and the bandit's secret stash of violet gold, torching the entire mountaintop in a blaze of flames before leaving with him in tow. In the short span of his life, just over a dozen years, Xiu-niang had tried to kill him on multiple occasions. She had fed him poison, stabbed him with a knife, tied him to a horse, and dragged him along. There had been times when she appeared to suddenly lose her mind and attempt to smother him with blankets in the middle of the night. Yet she managed to rein in her madness every time, thereby preserving his life, as well as a tiny, unrealistic sliver of fantasy. Doing his utmost to maintain his composure, Chang'eng said, "You're overthinking it. I never considered you my mother. It's just that I always thought the reason you hated me was because I was a stain on your life left by those bandits." Xiu-niang sat numbly before the mirror, her complexion growing increasingly pale. After a long moment, she sighed. "Child, I've wronged you." The instant she spoke these words, all the caution and resentment in Chang'eng's heart nearly collapsed to pieces. Only now did he realize all the wrongs he had suffered since childhood could have been resolved so easily, with such a little handful of words. Nonetheless, the 14-year-old youth held back his tears with all his might and instead asked in an exhausted voice, "Why are you telling me all of this? Now that you've found your conscience, are you planning on curing me of the poison in my body, or are you going to kill me?" Xiu-niang regarded the boy with astonished eyes, as if he were some sort of rare and precious implement. "You know," Chang'eng cut her off. "Of course I know. I've had nightmares every night since we settled in Yanhui town. Even when I doze off during the day, I startle awake in fright." Apart from last night, for the briefest moment, Chang'eng's thoughts scattered. He suddenly regretted his petty squabble with Shi. "I have yet to acknowledge anything worthwhile in my life," Chang'eng said. "But I haven't committed any shameful deeds either. There's no need for me to be haunted by so many ghosts. Or is there some strange illness in this world that causes one to be plagued by nightmares night after night?" Xiu-niang's bright red lips curved in a peculiar smile as her sluggish gaze landed on the iron cuff adorning Chang'eng's wrist. Her eyes gleamed with an intense light, as though hiding a pair of black poison-tipped arrows in their depths. "What else do you know?" Chang'eng instinctively tucked the iron cuff back into his sleeve. He felt it would be sullied by a single glance from her eyes. "I also know that the wolf pack that chased me down 2 years ago beyond the pass didn't find me on its own. Someone summoned them. You were warning me that there was no escape, that you had plenty of ways to kill me. Weren't you?" Chang'eng said with quiet calm. "Only barbarians know how to control such animals. In other words, ever since we arrived in Yanhui town, you've been in contact with the barbarian tribes. My guess is you're also one of them. Once, when you locked me in that cabinet as a child, I saw a man come in and rip open your clothes. There's an image of a wolf's head on your chest." Xiu-niang chuckled softly. "Barbarians. You actually call us barbarians." The sound of her laughter grew louder and louder until she was practically gasping for breath. Then Xiu-niang's laughter was abruptly cut off. Clutching at her chest, she began to cough violently. Chang'eng reached out instinctively, as if wanting to help, but he quickly recovered his senses and jerked his hands back, clenching them into fists instead. A thin rivulet of blood seeped from between Xiu-niang's fingers and landed on her pale yellow skirt, leaving behind a ghastly spotch of purple-black. Shocked, Chang'eng stepped forward. You. Xiu-niang clutched her elbow and struggled to straighten her body, shaking like a withered leaf buffeted by cold winds. After gasping in several mouthfuls of air, she fished out half a jade pendant engraved with twin lotus flowers and mandarin ducks from beneath her dressing case. Then she shoved it, bloodstains and all, into Changung's hands. Her face was snow white, and her blood-stained lips were more garishly bright than the rouge. Staring at Changung with bloodshot eyes, she said, "My name is not Xiu-niang. That is a name given to your women of the Central Plains. My name is Hu-gar. It means the violet gold at the heart of the earth." Choking on her own words, she was racked with another agonizing spate of coughs. She spat out a mouthful of blood, staining the front of Changung's robes red. Inauspicious violet gold. The woman's voice took on an odd sobbing quality as her breath came faster and faster. Her chest heaved like a broken bellows. My elder sister was the goddess of the eternal sky. Even the wolf god knelt before her in worship. You are a little freak that I raised with my own hands. She began to laugh, her breaths thin as gossamer. No one loves you. No one treats you with sincerity. She fumbled for Changung's wrist, sharp nails digging into his flesh as she took hold of the iron cuff. This is a cloud wrist cuff taken from the light armor of the Black Iron Battalion. It was specifically made by those black-hearted demons. Who gave this to you, As if burnt by her touch, Changung shoved her away. The woman collapsed against the dressing table, her body convulsing as she curled in on herself. She widened her lovely phoenix eyes, revealing malevolent white around the rims. Your body has been afflicted by the curse of Wu-Argu. I've given this poison the Chinese name Changung. Isn't it pretty? Her cheeks twitched violently as blood-flecked spittle foamed from her mouth. Her voice began to slur, but that didn't prevent Changung from hearing her clearly. The inimitable curse of Wu-Argu, undetectable and unbreakable. Someday, you will become the most powerful warrior the world has ever seen. But by then, you will no longer discern dream from reality. You will become a great lunatic. Changung stood numbly in place. Those barely comprehensible words drifted past his ears, slipping in and filling the joints between his bones with icy sludge. The blood of the goddess also flows through my veins. May the boundless mystical powers of the eternal sky protect you. By the end of your life, may your heart be filled with only hatred and suspicion. May you become a violent lover of bloodshed, and may carnage follow in your footsteps wherever you go. May you be doomed to drag all of them to a miserable... The word death stumbled as it slid from her throat. The woman's body spasmed wildly for a moment before she was seized with some new emotion. Slowly, she turned her head and gazed over at the small sachet hanging from the bed curtain. There was a protective talisman inside. Once, when Company Commander Xu was returning from duty, he had stopped by a temple outside the town walls on his way home and obtained it for her. The woman's lashes fluttered slightly. Her eyes filled with tears. They washed away the menace in her eyes, making them appear incomparably tender. It was a pity such tenderness lasted for only the briefest of moments. Like a lamp snuffed out, the light left her eyes, her tightly contracted pupils expanding in death. The richly attired woman's breath came to an abrupt stop in the middle of the world's most malicious curse. She collapsed heavily against the dressing table, wrapped in the last warmth of her rapidly cooling body. No one loves you. No one treats you with sincerity. By the end of your life, your heart will be filled with only hatred and suspicion. You will become a violent lover of bloodshed, and carnage will follow in your footsteps wherever you go. You are doomed to drag all of them to a miserable death. On that lifeless, sweltering last summer evening, Chang'eng stared dully at the sumptuously dressed body slumped against the dressing table and clutched at the bloodstained iron cuff in a daze. Why did she kill herself? Why did she hate him so much? And if she did, why did she raise him all this time? And what was the story behind this iron cuff from the Black Iron Battalion? Shen Shiliu. Who exactly was he? Xiu-niang's curse seemed to have already taken effect. A child's formative experiences of trust and intimacy come from their parents, who give all they have to raise them. Chang'eng, however, had never received such care. He had been forced into constant vigilance, heart full of misgivings and caution. No matter how magnanimous and considerate his nature, such an existence was bound to transform him into a stray dog with its tail tucked between its legs. Even if he desperately yearned for human warmth, he would still reject it again and again out of fear. He was at once seized by an intense notion. He had to find Shen Shiliu. He had to discover what kind of divine being this godfather of his was and what intentions he harbored. Yet the moment he stepped out of Xiu-niang's blood-soaked boudoir, he found himself unexpectedly timid. Of course, Chang'eng thought dazedly. Shen Xiansheng's knowledge and abilities. How could he possibly be nothing but a destitute scholar who failed the imperial exams multiple times? Although Shiliu was an indolent layabout, he had the noble bearing of an aristocratic young master. He lived on others' charity, yet he never seemed remotely poverty-stricken. How could he possibly be some ordinary wastrel? These were all things Chang'eng should have realized long ago, but when he closed his eyes, all he could see was Shen Shiliu sitting by his sickbed, head propped up in his hand. If that, too, had been a hypocritical show of false affection. The moment the door opened, the old kitchen maid, who had been straining her neck trying to peer inside, stepped forward with an ingratiating smile. "Young master, today—" Chang'eng glanced at her with bloodshot eyes. The woman shuddered in fright and took a long moment to recover her wits. Clutching at her chest, she grumbled, "What's the matter with—" Before she could finish, she saw the scene inside the room. The maid froze, then stumbled back 3 steps and collapsed on the ground. Tilting her head back, she let out a piercing, nearly inhuman shriek. At almost the same time, the sharp sound of a siren filled the town. Someone had set off the gate tower's siren flare. Wreathed in white smoke dyed by violet gold, the meter-long flare shot into the sky with a whoosh. A shrill wail rippled outwards some 20 kilometers, slicing through the grim tranquility that had blanketed Yanhui town for 14 years. Shen Yi had been in the middle of sorting out a suit of armor. At the sound of the siren flare, he lifted his head. In the very next moment, someone kicked the Shen family's front gate open from the outside. Shen Yi snatched up the heavy sword he had divested from the armor. "It's me," Shiliu called in a low voice. "The barbarians made their move early?" Shen Yi asked grimly. The question was fleeting and muted, yet the half-deaf Shen Shiliu didn't miss a word. He responded with total composure. "There are barbarian spies aboard the giant kite. The men on the returning ship aren't our people." Shiliu didn't linger as he spoke, striding swiftly into the bedroom. Standing beside the bed, he lifted his hand and, with one sharp knife-hand strike, split the bed in two with a loud crack. Unexpectedly, the base of the bed was hollow. A dark suit of armor lay beneath the wooden boards. Shiliu deftly pried open the hidden compartment on the armor's breastplate and fished out a black iron token of authority. His fingertips were pale in the eerie, frigid glare of the token. He pivoted back toward the doorway. That slouching back of his that always seemed as pliant as mud was now straight as an iron spear. A gust of wind drifted through the open doors, lifting his thin, dark robe before quickly brushing past him, as though terrified of the cold, murderous aura emanating from his body. "Jiping," said Shiliu. Jiping was Shen Yi's courtesy name. Shiliu never addressed him with it in the presence of outsiders. The two of them spent their days arguing about the most insignificant chores and seemed as close as actual brothers. But now, Shen Yi took a step back and dropped down easily to one knee. Sir, seeing as they've come earlier than expected, we may as well take advantage of the chaos and haul in the net. I'm leaving His Highness the Fourth Prince to you. Get him out of town first. Yes, sir, Shunyi responded. Then, like a flash of lightning, Shirley picked up his outer robe and the sword beside the bed and turned to leave. Chapter 7. Enemy Attack. The veteran officer overseeing the town's defense today was surnamed Wang. He had wasted most of his life atop Yanhui town's walls. In his spare time, he liked to drink, and when he was deep in his cups, he liked to gather a crowd and boast about how once upon a time, in the good old days, he followed old Marquis Gu on the northern expedition. No one knew how much of his story was true, but it wasn't entirely beyond the realm of possibility either. After all, the old Marquis had been a human with basic human needs, so he must have brought along some people to cook and clean. But no matter how negligent he was, old Wang didn't dare touch a drop on the day of the giant kite's return. On this day, all the senior officers lined up in formation, and everyone feared making a spectacle of themselves by committing careless mistakes. Unfortunately, the more one fears something, the more likely it is to occur. Old Wang craned his neck, watching the siren flare rise slowly into the sky, and howled. What shitty little bastard forgot what day it is? Go cause trouble in your wife's bed if you're gonna get sozzled. What are you doing setting off the siren flare? You think it's a silly little toy you can set off like fireworks? At the mouth of the underground river, there was a large pool of water that served to welcome the giant kite back to harbor, which was enclosed by an iron palisade. This barrier was already half open when the siren flare went off, startling the soldiers. Bewildered, the soldiers didn't dare act recklessly and slid the iron bolt back into place. The palisade ended up stuck in an awkwardly half-open position like a giant gaping maw that had been struck dumb, catching the dragon heads extending from the giant kite's prow with perfect precision. There were already soldiers standing at the ready who were waiting to help unload the violet gold from the massive ship. At this, they all looked back in confusion. The company commander in charge of supplies pulled a small copper squall from his lapels, aimed it at the soldiers responsible for opening the iron palisade, and bellowed, "What are you all standing around daydreaming for? The giant kite's stuck." Before he could finish, the deck of the giant kite exploded in a scorching blaze of light. An enormous stream of white fog erupted with a whoosh as an iron arrow thick as a man's arm hurtled into the sky and, amid cries of alarm, punched through the wailing siren flare with unstoppable force. The siren flare fell instantly silent and, after hanging briefly in the air, plummeted back to earth. There was a fleeting moment of silence, then pandemonium erupted. A Parhelion arrow? What's going on? Who activated the Parhelion arrows? Have the people on the ship gone mad? This is treason! What are they doing? The Parhelion was a giant mechanical bow that measured 10 meters wide when fully drawn. Only colossal machines like giant kites could accommodate its size. Obviously, such a terrifying weapon was impossible to operate with human strength alone. The base of the bow was equipped with a fuel tank filled with violet gold. When fully powered up, an arrow released from such a bow could pierce through a city wall a dozen meters thick. It was said that when a giant kite glided toward the horizon, the shower of Parhelion arrows in its wake was like divine retribution meted out by the gods. Even heavy armor couldn't defend against them. The whole thing happened too quickly. Old Wang snatched up the first scope and stretched his neck like an old tortoise as he mumbled, "What in the name of... This is serious. Notify Magistrate Guo and Commander Liu at once. Go!" He was still giving orders when the darkened fire pinions on the giant kite lit up once again. The machinery had no time to warm up, and the roar of burning violet gold was punctuated by a series of explosions, so that the giant kite seemed like a massive beast waking from slumber. Old Wang looked helplessly through the field scope as the deck of the giant kite flipped over and exposed a squadron of soldiers in heavy armor stepping menacingly into formation. The armor gleamed like the reflection of sunlight on a river. Even from a distance, a silent pressure emanated from their ranks. The leader of the group pushed open his visor, revealing a heavily scarred face. Terror shuddered through old Wang. His face was unfamiliar. How did a stranger manage to find his way onto the giant kite? Scarface broke into a smile. Tilting his head back, he let out a long whistle so shrill it pierced through the rumbling of the machinery, like a wolf's howl. The heavy, armored warriors behind him mimicked his stance as howls rose and fell. They were like a pack of wolves starved for an entire winter, baring their deadly, insatiable fangs. Some nameless voice in the crowd burst out, "Barbarians!" This was like a poke to a hornet's nest. The residents of a dozen neighboring villages, men and women, young and old, were all gathered in Yanhui town today. In an instant, every one of them turned into panicking sheep. Seized by terror, they scattered in all directions, pushing and shoving and trampling countless people as they fled. They even collided with the war horses of the soldiers on duty, making the poor animals whinny incessantly in alarm. Old Wang leaped onto the watchtower atop the town gate and drew a pike at his waist to stab open the gold tank at the top of the tower. He knew this tank contained a small quantity of violet gold, fuel for the everlasting altar lamps that burned day and night. If he was lucky and could ignite the violet gold, he could blast the roof of the watchtower into the sky as a makeshift siren flare. Violet gold poured from the tank in torrents, choking the old veteran with its pungent smell as he pulled out a fire starter with trembling hands. As the sky filled with howls, those wizened hands shook the stick back and forth, producing a small handful of sparks, and shoved the whole thing into the gold tank. Half of the violet gold inside the tank had already been split, but the rest ignited into a raging fire at the touch of flame. The watchtower's vent was blocked, so only a few tiny streams of steam managed to choke their way out. Any second now, it was going to blow. A parhelion arrow loosened with enough force to puncture the sun-pierced old Wang's chest, and his mortal body exploded into smithereens. Yet the arrow didn't slow at all, taking the remnants of the old veteran's body with it as it punched into the side of the watchtower. There was a loud rumble as the tower collapsed from its height. Shattered rock hurtled down as soldiers and civilians fled the site. At the same moment, the burning gold tank at the top of the tower finally shot into the sky with a shrill scream. An inauspicious flash of violet light followed by a giant explosion lit up half of Yanhui town like a burst of fireworks. It was only then that the messenger standing by the copper squall came to his senses. He raised his voice and bellowed, "Enemy attack! The barbarians are attacking!" The captured giant kite slowly rose into the sky as a deadly shower of parhelion arrows rained down on the earth. The civilians fled for their lives like a swarm of heedless flies as 36 light-armored cavalrymen rushed out over the half-open limestone slabs covering the river. All the cannons lining the town walls raised their barrels in unison, taking aim at the giant kite drifting overhead. Fire and smoke soon filled the town. The cargo bay of the giant kite opened, and countless northern barbarian soldiers descended from the sky, howling as they plummeted. The wolves howled with rage, the streets filled with blood. Chaos reigned. The scar-faced man leaped from the giant kite. Steam erupted from the soles of his armored feet, propelling him 10 meters into the air before he landed on a cavalryman's warhorse. There was no way the warhorse could bear the full weight of heavy armor. With a whinny of panic, its front legs snapped at the knee. Its rider had no time to react. The barbarian warrior seized him by the neck and bit down viciously on his throat. Blood spurted out like splashes of oil as the warrior tore a chunk of flesh out of the rider's neck with his bare teeth. The man didn't even have time to scream before he passed into the west. Scarface let out a booming laugh before swallowing that chunk of human flesh in 2 quick bites like a carrion-eating demon. Then he pursed his lips and whistled. A handful of barbarians in heavy armor appeared. They followed close at his side as they swept past the bloody carnage of the streets and rode straight for Company Commander Xiu's residence. Two classes of armor were used in the military. Light armor was worn by the cavalry and could only support a small amount of propulsion. It relied on the man and animal, and its advantages lay in how light and convenient it was. Heavy armor was a completely different beast. A suit of heavy armor was roughly the height of two grown men and equipped with a gold tank on its back. With violet gold flowing through its joints, the armor could traverse 1,000 kilometers in seconds and lift a broadsword weighing hundreds of kilograms. It could even be armed with a miniature cannon at the waist. In short, a single suit of heavy armor had the power to annihilate 1,000 soldiers. A fully equipped heavy armor infantry would preclude the need for a cavalry, infantry, or navy, but the cost of heavy armor was much too high. Operating a suit of heavy armor for 6 to 10 hours would burn through a full tank of violet gold, an amount that could keep altar lamps on the watchtowers lit for 2 years. Violet gold was the lifeline of the nation. On the black market, it would be difficult to purchase so much as 50 grams of highly adulterated violet gold for the same weight in gold coin. Even in such a powerful nation, there was only one military division that could support a fully equipped contingent of heavy armored infantry, the Black Carapace Division of the Black Iron Battalion, commanded by the Marquis of Anding, Gu Yun. So where exactly did these barbarian soldiers acquire so many suits of heavy armor? Stumbling out the Xiu family residence, the old kitchen maid ran right into this cluster of fell stars. She didn't have time to utter a single sound before she was smashed into a side wall and reduced to a bloody paste. The scar-faced barbarian marched straight into the inner courtyard unchallenged, bellowing, "Hugar! Hugar!" Of course, Hugar, Xiu-niang, could no longer answer his call. The elaboratory carved wooden door let out a miserable shriek and split in two as it was kicked in by a heavy armored knight with a loud bang. The barbarians' implacable footsteps halted at last as they froze in stunned silence before the door of the lady's boudoir. The faint scent of incense had yet to disappear. The door was still sparsely lit, and the tassels hanging from the bed curtains cast long, scattered shadows on the ground. Someone had tidied up the dressing table, leaving only an open box of rouge in the corner. A young boy knelt before the bed with his back turned toward them, and, indistinct in the darkness, there seemed to be a person lying on the bed. The boy, Chang'eng, instinctively glanced back at the loud crash. Strangely, he wasn't at all surprised to see a group of scary-looking barbarian warriors break into his home in broad daylight. Realization dawned on him as to why Xiu-niang had killed herself. The fact that these barbarians could enter the town must have something to do with her. Company Commander Xu had been aboard the giant kite. In all likelihood, he had already been executed by the barbarians thanks to her treasonous actions. This woman had succeeded in enacting her revenge for the wrongs committed against her nation and family, yet she'd also caused the death of the only man in the world to treat her with kindness. Chang'eng's young heart was filled to the brim with thoughts of the futility of life. He shot an apathetic glance at the barbarians before turning back and kowtowing to the woman lying on the bed. This he considered repayment for the years of faltering benevolence she had shown him by allowing him to live. With this last obeisance complete, he severed all connections with the dead woman. Chang'eng rose to his feet and turned to face the heavy armored warriors standing by the door. The suits of heavy armor were as immovable as mountains. Standing before them with this young mortal body, he was like an ant attempting to shake a great tree. By all rights, he should have been terrified, but he wasn't scared at all. It wasn't that Chang'eng thought he could repel so many enormous barbarian warriors by himself. He knew very well that his chances of escaping this calamity were slim. Yet for some odd reason, he was not afraid. Perhaps it was because every bit of fear in his heart had been wrung out upon learning that Shen Shiliu had a secret identity and ulterior motives. The scar-faced warrior stared at Chang'eng until a thought seemed to occur to him. His expression turned sinister. "Where is Hugar?" Chang'eng's eyes lingered on his face for a moment. "I remember you," he said. "2 winters ago, you were the one who led those wolves that attacked me in the snow." One of the other northern barbarian soldiers, clad in heavy armor, stepped forward to grab the boy, but the Scarface man lifted his hand, stopping him. Scarface lowered his head and bent down somewhat clumsily to stare at the youth whose head barely reached the chest of his suit armor. In oddly accented Chinese, he said once again, "I'm asking you, Hugar, Xiu-niang, where is she?" "She's dead," said Chang'eng. Clutching the iron cuff on his wrist, he stepped to the side and revealed the silent corpse lying on the bed. The corner of Xiu-niang's mouth was still stained with a streak of black blood, creating stark contrast with her snow-white complexion. She looked like the wilted remains of a poisonous flower. The barbarians standing in the courtyard let out a howl of sorrow and fell to their knees in a flurry of movement. Scarface appeared temporarily lost. He stepped slowly into Xiu-niang's room. Although his movements were careful, the floor splintered with fine cracks at each step of his heavy armor-clad feet. The warrior walked over to the bed and reached out as though to brace himself against the large, ornately carved frame, but shrank back before he could follow through, as if scared of breaking the bedpost. As he bent down in his heavy armor, white steam drifted out behind him, dispersing throughout the tiny bedroom like mist. The violet gold stored inside his suit burned with a soft gasping noise that made him sound like an animal on the verge of death. That animal lightly touched the woman's face and felt only a desolate chill. The scar-faced warrior let out a keening cry, like a wolf that had lost its beloved mate. Then the heavy armor standing before the bed whipped around at a speed incomprehensible to the naked eye. White steam billowed wildly outwards as a large mechanical hand reached out and caught Chang'eng in its grasp. Chang'eng felt his feet leave the ground. A sharp pain lanced through his back as the barbarian warrior picked him up and slammed him viciously against the wall, his blood and bones juddering at the impact. The collision split a crack through the wall. Chang'eng couldn't hold back a mouthful of blood and spat it all over the scar-faced warrior's iron-encased arm. Lowering his head with difficulty, Chang'eng met those murderous eyes. He had never seen eyes so heavily suffused with rust before. But somehow, despite the huge disparity in strength, he unexpectedly found the will to fight. Chang'eng stared furiously at the barbarian warrior before him, gaze unflinching. Chapter 8. Life History. The youth and the killer's eyes met in inevitable confrontation. Though the wolf pup's fangs and claws had yet to fully sharpen, his viciousness was innate. Perhaps this was his natural disposition. When faced with life-threatening situations, there are two types of humans who fight back. The first are those who, after careful deliberation, perhaps due to a sense of morality, responsibility, or personal integrity, or perhaps after weighing the advantages and disadvantages, feel that they have no choice but to fight. Although these people are afraid, their conscience or rationality allows them to vanquish their fears in a show of true bravery. The second type are those who don't think about anything at all. All their actions stem from instinct. They instinctively grow angry and are instinctively filled with fighting spirit. Even if they're vaguely aware of that their resistance may lead to worse outcomes, they can't resist the urge to tear off a piece of their enemy's flesh. Right now, Chang'eng was undoubtedly the latter. As if stung by Chang'eng's gaze, the scar-faced warrior furiously raised his huge fist, intending to dash his brains out on the spot. At that moment, there came an angry shout from outside. The body of the barbarian standing guard by the door went flying, demolishing half the room. The dimly lit boudoir brightened as sunlight poured in. Chang'eng narrowed his eyes, but before he could make sense of the cold gleam of light before him, he heard a blood-curdling scream. The arm with which the scar-faced barbarian warrior had been holding Chang'eng aloft was completely and ruthlessly severed. Feet kicking in empty air, Chang'eng fell helplessly to the side, only to be gently caught by the metal arms of a different suit of heavy armor. Shunxiansheng's courtyard was always littered with disassembled suits of light armor. Heavy armor, on the other hand, was extremely expensive and never handed off to civilian artificers for maintenance. Not even an artificer with connections to Company Commander Xiu was trusted with them. There had only been one exception. a suit of heavy armor so utterly broken down and dilapidated that it was consigned to General Slope. Using his connections, Shun Xiansheng had privately asked to keep it and, after bringing it home, had enthusiastically taken that ancient suit of broken armor apart piece by piece and given Chang'eng a thorough rundown of all its components. Chang'eng remembered him saying that donning a suit of heavy armor was akin to carrying 100,000 kilograms of extra weight. It was easy to crush several horses or demolish several layers of fortifications. With a little knowledge of the fundamentals, even a child could use it. The greatest difficulty in operating a suit of heavy armor lay not in performing feats of extreme strength. On the contrary, the most skilled armored warriors were the ones who could thread the finest of needles while wearing the heaviest of armor. The newcomer's armor was different from the suits worn by the barbarian warriors. It seemed more slightly built, and its surface didn't gleam cold silver either. Rather, it was pitch black and seemed somewhat unremarkable. The newcomer patted Chang'eng lightly on the back, then set the youth on one shoulder and said in a low voice, "Don't be scared." The voice coming through the armor was distorted, but Chang'eng's ears were keen. He turned to stare pensively at the iron mask, which hid its wearer from sight. The barbarians standing by the door appeared to have recovered their senses. They rushed wildly forward like a swarm of bees and, with Scarface at the center of their formation, fanned out into a circle surrounding the black-armored warrior and Chang'eng. The black-armored warrior raised one hand to protect the spot where Chang'eng was sitting on his shoulder and lifted a smoothly polished staff with the other. Thin wisps of steam trailed from one end of that unimpressive-looking iron rod. The black-armored warrior had chopped off Scarface's arm too quickly for Chang'eng to see clearly. Now, a tendril of doubt wound through his mind as he wondered, "Is that dinky iron rod his only weapon?" The scarred warrior's face was drenched in cold sweat, and his complexion had turned ashen. Taking 2 cautious steps back, he said in a guttural voice, "Black carapace armor and a wind slasher. You're one of those demon crows." Chang'eng sat stunned for a moment. Then his spine stiffened. Demon crows? Now he recalled. 14 years ago, during the Northern Expedition, the Black Iron Battalion tore deep into the heart of the vast grasslands of the north like a black cyclone. Members of the barbarian tribes regarded them with both fear and hatred, referring to them as demon crows. The black-armored warrior ignored him and instructed Chang'eng dispassionately, "Hold on tight." Scarface let out a battle cry and, following his lead, the 4 barbarian warriors rushed forward in practice formation. As swords and spears came swinging in all directions, a flash of dark purple light sparked beneath the black-armored warrior's feet, allowing him to weave seamlessly between the glint of enemy blades. With a leap, the black-armored warrior landed on the Xiu residence's crumbling rooftop. His left shoulder, the one supporting Chang'eng, barely shifted beneath the boy, but the moment he found his footing, the warrior spun his right arm with such disorienting speed that the iron staff in his hand became a hazy afterimage. Chang'eng opened his eyes wide and saw a ring of phantom-like blades emerge from one end of the black-armored warrior's staff and sweep downward like a tornado touching down. The armored barbarian soldier in closest pursuit had no time to dodge and took the strike squarely in the chest. The gold tank set over his heart ruptured, and the violet gold contained within ignited a terrifying blaze. The metal behemoth exploded in an instant, leaving behind a bloody, dismembered mess. Searing droplets of blood splashed onto Chang'eng's face. Harnessing all his self-control, he barely maintained his composure, hands tightly clutching the edge of the black-armored warrior's shoulder. This was the invincible Black Iron Battalion of legend, which could fight its enemies 100 to 1. Recognizing the disparity in strength, the remaining barbarians didn't dare engage in single combat against this enemy. After exchanging a look, they charged out of Xiu-niang's room and leapt into the roof from all directions. One lunged at the black-armored warrior from below, hacking at the joints of his legs, while another swung a sword at his head to prevent him from escaping upward. A third dived at the black-armored warrior from the rear and stabbed at the gold tank at his waist. After losing his arm, Scarface had retreated some dozen steps away. He lifted his remaining arm, and one end of his vambrace cracked open to reveal the sinister tip of an arrow, loaded and ready to fire. He leveled the weapon at Chang'eng, who was still perched on the black armored warrior's shoulder. These barbarians had grown up hunting together. They knew how to chase down, encircle, and dispatch their prey, and their cooperation was practically flawless. The misty white air filled with hair-raising killing intent. Chang'eng had finally figured out the mechanism behind the black armored warrior's staff. When the staff was spun quickly, several black iron blades measuring roughly 30 centimeters would extend from one end of the weapon with fine bursts of steam. When the weapon was withdrawn, the sharp blades would quickly slot back into hidden incisions on the side of the staff, disappearing from view. The blades swung in a circle with each extension and retraction, like a terrifying meat grinder. Without warning, Chang'eng's feet kicked through the air as the black armored warrior transferred the youth's weight from his shoulder to the crook of his elbow. He pressed Chang'eng tightly against the chest plate of his heavy armor before unexpectedly arching backwards. Chang'eng was scared witless. Setting aside his own weight, this suit of heavy armor alone must weigh several hundred kilograms. Bending back like this would put all that weight on the black armored warrior's waist. Wouldn't his spine snap under the burden? But the black armored warrior continued, performing a neat backflip in the air. Then, with Chang'eng still in his arms, he leapt down from the roof, evading the arrow shot by the scar-faced man by the slimmest margin. The gleam of the windslasher's blade condensed into an elongated slash, cutting down one barbarian while relieving another of his legs, as simple and swift as a falcon swooping down on a rabbit. Steam erupted from the black-armored warrior's greaves, propelling the heavy armor several dozen meters away in the blink of an eye. It would have been child's play to dispatch the rest of the enemy's soldiers, but since Chang'eng was present, he engaged them no further. "I'll escort you out of town first," the black-armored warrior said. "It's too dangerous here. As for your mother, my condolences." Chang'eng leaned against the black-armored warrior in silence. "My mother killed herself with poison," he said after a moment. "She's been in contact with the barbarians the entire time. She was probably a spy for them." The black-armored warrior said nothing. It seemed such a revelation was not surprising to him. "You've rescued the son of a barbarian spy. How unlucky of you." Chang'eng paused briefly again before tearing through the other's mask. "Shun. Fine streams of white steam poured from the sides of the black-armored warrior's face. The black iron visor flipped up, revealing Shun Yi's gentle and scholarly mien. "There was a mutiny on the giant kite during the northern patrol," Shun Yi said. "I thought perhaps Xiu-niang was the traitor, but now it appears Xiu-niang committed suicide out of guilt toward her husband. Xiu-niang has likely already died for the country, ignorant of the truth. As for you, I'm very sorry for your loss." "So you knew all along?" Chang'eng muttered. "Who are you?" "This humble official is an officer of the Black Iron Battalion and a subordinate under Marshal Gu," said Shun Yi. "An officer of the Black Iron Battalion and a subordinate of the Marquis of Anding, Gu Yuan." As Chang'eng digested these words, he found it all very peculiar. He had only just learned that, in addition to having no blood ties to his reclusive mother, she was also a barbarian spy. Now it turned out that the pedantic, poverty-stricken scholar next door, whose hands were permanently stained by machine oil, was a general of the Black Iron Battalion. Then what about Shirliu? Chang'eng thought with a humorless smile that even if someone were to tell him now that his godfather was actually Marshal Gu himself, he would no longer have the energy to be surprised. "Why is a direct subordinate of Marshal Gu living secluded in a backwater town? Why did you save me, the son of a barbarian tribeswoman?" The moment these two questions left Chang'eng's mouth, he knew he was on the verge of losing it. He willed himself to shut up, but he couldn't prevent one last superfluous question from squeezing its way between his teeth. "What about Shun Shirliu?" Having asked that final question, Chang'eng was overcome by an indescribable wave of sadness. After everything that had happened, he still couldn't help but think of Shun Shirliu. He knew perfectly well that this person was doubtless some mysterious individual of great renown who had come to do an undercover inspection tour of the countryside. Yet Chang'e was still worried about his poor vision and weak hearing. He wondered whether he might accidentally become the casualty of a clash of swords, or if he would find a place to hide. Even worse, he couldn't help but wonder, why was Shen Xiansheng the one who came to find me? Why didn't Shi Liu come instead? The heavens shuddered with the cries of battle as the giant gate shrouded Yanhui town in its shadows. Parhelion arrows fell now and again like lingering ghosts. In the distance, a house caught fire, the conflagration spreading quickly through the town. Shen Yi turned a blind eye to the chaos around him, maintaining an expression of cold indifference as he wove through the rain of arrows like a bird in flight or a fish in water. Your Highness, please hold on tight. What did you just call me? Chang'e asked numbly. Calm and unhurried, Shen Yi explained. 14 years ago, His Majesty the Emperor embarked on a southern tour. At the time, the noble consort was pregnant and stayed behind in one of the temporary imperial residences. A wicked assassin made an attempt on her life, but thankfully, with the help of her royal servants and her sister, she managed to escape. However, as they fled south, they unexpectedly encountered a group of violent insurrectionists. The noble consort was in poor health. Amid the turmoil and confusion, she risked her life to give birth to your Highness, but was ultimately unable to reunite with His Majesty. The noble consort's younger sister fled with your Highness in her care, and we lost contact with you. Over the years, His Majesty has sent numerous envoys on private investigations, always believing your Highness was killed in the aftermath of that tragedy. That is, until 3 years ago, when clues finally surfaced. Thus, he sent us here to meet you, Shen Yi explained concisely. Please forgive me, your Highness, for not being able to divulge my true identity all this time. Torn between laughter and tears, Chang'e thought perhaps Shen Xiansheng's brain was filled with engine oil. This wild tale he had woven was so full of holes it was practically falling apart at the seams. In that case, according to his story, Xiu-niang was the younger sister of the noble consort. Could it be that the noble consort was also a barbarian? Also, would the emperor really only send 2 people to find his long-lost son? And even if the emperor was indeed so impoverished that out of the countless civil and military officials of the imperial court he could only afford to dispatch 2, why would these people remain undercover for over 2 years? A general of the legendary Black Iron Battalion had been living right next door. How could he have been unaware of Xiu-niang's secret correspondence with the barbarians? Why did he not stop her? How absurd. Brushing away the doubts clouding his heart, Chang'e interrupted Shen Yi. You've got the wrong person. Your Highness, said Shen Yi. You've got the wrong person. Chang'e was utterly exhausted. He had no more patience for these people who only spewed lies. Put me down. I'm the bastard son begotten from that barbarian woman lying with some unknown mountain bandit. I'm hardly worthy of being rescued by a general of the Black Iron Battalion, nor am I worthy of calling someone of such lofty status my godfather. Hearing his final words, Shen Yi sighed, feeling that most of Chang'e's ire was directed toward Shi Liu. Implicated by association, he had become a convenient target for the youth's anger. Shen Yi gently took hold of one of Chang'e's flailing feet and said, Please forgive my impropriety. Your Highness's right pinky toe is somewhat more bent than most ordinary folk. It is identical to His Majesty's, and a marker of all imperial descendants. There is no mistake. Chang'e swiftly retracted his foot as his heart turned even colder. He remembered this incident. His toe hadn't been curved from birth at all. Rather, it had been personally smashed by Xiu-niang. Ignoring his sobbing cries, she had viciously broken his toe before wrapping it with a foot-binding technique used by women, forcing his bones into a deformed arch. A descendant of dragons and phoenixes? What bullshit! To think that even this could be forged. Chapter 9. Killing Intent. At that instant, a familiar wail burrowed its way into Chang'e's ears. Turning back, he saw Butcher Gu's decapitated head hanging from a banister alongside the head of a pig. The corpulent body of his wife lay underneath, her skin pallid. She had been crushed by a section of collapsed wall and already breathed her last. The intermittent sobbing of their chubby little son could be heard coming from a short distance away. Aghast, Chang'eng blurted out without thinking, "Isn't that Ge Pengxiao from the butcher's family?" Shun Yi didn't even pause as he sped by. Thinking he hadn't heard him, Chang'eng cried, "General, wait! My orders are to protect and escort your highness out of town. We can't afford to tarry," Shun Yi said. From behind the metal visor, his voice was like iron covered in icy frost on the coldest day of winter. Chang'eng was stunned. The howling wind blew past his ears as beads of cold sweat slid belatedly down his spine. When he reached out, all he could feel was the chill of the black iron armor. It was so cold, just like his iron cuff that never seemed to warm, no matter how long it stayed pressed against his flesh. Ge Pengxiao had a natural ability to endear himself to people. When he smiled, he was all crinkled eyes and exposed teeth. A clever little scamp. There was no one who disliked him. Chang'eng said quietly, "General, isn't he your student?" He didn't hear Shun Yi's response. Perhaps, Chang'eng thought, in the eyes of this General Shun, the students who spent every day of the past 2 years at his side were nothing more than part of the role he played while carrying out the duties of the emperor. Indeed, what did an insignificant place like Yanhui Town matter to an officer of the glorious Black Iron Battalion? What did the son of a butcher matter? In this world, perhaps there were some lives that were more valuable than others. Even if someone was likable, it didn't mean their life had worth. Of course, Shun Yi's blood wasn't as frigid as his armor, but he had few options in these tumultuous circumstances. He had to protect this precious little prince all by himself, so he naturally had to prioritize Chang'eng's safety. He couldn't afford any unexpected mishaps. Furthermore, the western regions had only recently pledged allegiance to Great Liang, so the Black Iron Battalion's elite troops were still stationed there. They had brought no more than a small group of soldiers to contend with the power-hungry barbarians and had spent 2 years laying this trap. In order to defend the enemy despite their inferior numbers, it was imperative to strike a killing blow. Reeling in a big fish like these barbarian conspirators would buy them several years of peace on the northern border. Fail here, and all their previous effort would be wasted. The reasons were too complex to explain in a few words. How could Shun Yi possibly convey them to a half-grown child in so little time? With some difficulty, Shun Yi said, "Your Highness, please forgive me." "Your Highness!" Chang'eng bent down and grabbed the black iron latch affixed to Shun Yi's armored elbow, catching him off guard. Obviously, a suit of heavy armor issued by the Black Iron Battalion couldn't be so easily pried apart, but his interference forced Shun Yi to loosen the grip of his iron gauntlets by a few centimeters. Shun Yi had no choice but to yield. Chang'eng had never encountered a real black iron suit of heavy armor until today. The difference between the precision instrument that was a black iron heavy armor and those broken down heaps of junk used to guard Yanhui Town was lost on him. He had no idea that if a black carapace encountered brunt force damage, a spring-like mechanism would launch a projectile with enough power to snap a tree trunk thicker than a man's spread arms. Never mind the mortal body of a young boy. Seizing this opportunity, Chang'eng nimbly pulled his feet free and flipped down from Shun Yi's shoulder. "I am not some highness." Chang'eng regarded him from 2 steps away, his expression darker than the black iron itself. "And my feet aren't dragon claws or anything like that either. It's a deformity caused by my mother binding my feet with broken crockery. If what you say is true, and she really did have some connection with the imperial family, then perhaps she meant to create a fraudulent prince to muddle the imperial lineage. You seem to be in a great rush, sir. I'm sure you have far more important responsibilities to attend to. I'm not afraid of dying, nor do I have any intention of stealing the identity of some blue-blooded imperial kinsman. If that's clear, I won't keep you any longer." Shun Yi flipped his black iron visor up and stared at the youth in shock. Chang'eng, however, didn't spare him another glance as he jumped down from the top of the wall and ran towards Ge Pengxiao's cries for help. In a small place like Yanhui Town, such a suit of black iron heavy armor was extremely conspicuous. While Shun Yi stood briefly bewildered, he caught the attention of a group of barbarian soldiers who wasted no time engaging him in combat. Chang'eng wasn't at all concerned. Even if he was merely an amateur when it came to fighting, he could tell those barbarians didn't stand a chance against this martial expert from the Black Iron Battalion. The folk legends claiming that it had only taken a few dozen black carapaces to conquer the grasslands all those years ago may have exaggerated, but it was clear they weren't just wind from an empty cave. Chang'ung's many years of martial training weren't totally useless. He dashed through the narrow streets on agile feet and vaulted over a courtyard wall just in time to see a barbarian soldier stove in a veteran guard's chest with a single strike. The older soldier uttered no sound as he collapsed to the ground with a thud. The blow was almost certainly fatal. Gupang Xiao clutched at his head and shrank into a corner of the courtyard in terror, his face so swollen he looked like a steamed bun. The old soldier's fallen sword lay several meters away. When the barbarian's back was turned, Chang'ung seized his chance and lunged forward, scooping up the heavy blade. The tip of the sword released a thin jet of steam. It was a rotary sword, though clearly old and in terrible state of despair. Whether it was still usable was anyone's guess. Hearing movement behind him, the barbarian lurched clumsily around in his heavy armor. Gupang Xiao opened his mouth wide. Chang'ung twisted open the steam valve on the pommel of the rotary sword, and the sharp blade began to revolve with a groan. A burnt smell filled the air. How many parts inside this weapon were broken? It jolted so hard, Chang'ung nearly lost his grip. Letting out a great shout, Chang'ung swung it at the giant tree beside him. The whirring rotary sword looked like a piece of useless scrap metal, but it was excellent at chopping down trees. The barbarian soldier had no time to react. The tree toppled with a resounding crash and landed precisely on top of him. Chang'ung bellowed at Gupang Xiao, "Quick, run!" Gupang Xiao's face was blurred with tears and snot. Raising his voice, he cried out, "Daga!" Before he could say another word, the barbarian pinned beneath the giant tree let out an explosive roar and hacked the offending obstacle in half, tossing it aside like it was nothing. He was like an enraged water buffalo as he glowered with crimson eyes at the two practically defenseless boys. Seeing that the only way out was to fight, Chang'ung prepared to meet the enemy head-on. He sucked in a deep breath and turned slightly, standing with his shoulders at a slant and assuming a stable, ready position. Both hands tightened on his sword. Regrettably, it didn't matter how stable Chang'ung's stance was. The moment he steadied his feet, he heard a clunk. The rotary sword had jammed. After a few additional sputtering noises, it discharged a plume of black smoke, thus becoming a bona fide piece of useless scrap metal. Gupang Xiao gasped in horror. This is... "Get out of the way," said Chang'ung quietly. Living up to his reputation for quick wits, Gupang Xiao curled himself into a harmless meatball and rolled back into his corner without delay, clearing the area. The barbarian soldier snarled furiously, fully intending to smash this insolent little brat into paste. The instant those pot-sized iron fists brushed the top of his head, Chang'ung ducked down, swiftly slipping through the cracks in his opponent's attack. As he swept past the body of the old veteran, he leaned down and, with a quick snap, deftly removed the soldier's armored greaves. He heard a gust of wind behind him. Clutching the greaves to his chest, Chang'ung somersaulted out of the way and dove through a small hole in the wall typically reserved for the neighbor's dog. He kicked his legs out the moment he landed, throwing caution to the wind as he fit the set of armored greaves into his own legs. With a thunderous boom, the flimsy earthen walls of the commoner's home disintegrated with a single swing of the barbarian warrior's fists, showering the courtyard with bits of dirt. At this critical moment, Chang'ung activated the greaves. The residual violet gold in the steel leg guards expelled fine bursts of steam, propelling him 10 meters away in an instant. For a long second, Chang'ung felt like he was floating on air. Aside from the iron cuff, this was his first time wearing a piece of steel armor. Straddling the line between life and death, he grabbed at the broken edge of the shattered courtyard wall and narrowly managed to keep his distance. "Look out!" Gupang Xiao yelped. The barbarian soldier swept aside the flying bricks with brute force, armor creaking with the strain as the steam gushing from beneath his feet pushed him aloft like an immortal rising through misty clouds. The child was more difficult to dispatch than expected. He lowered his iron fists, and the gears in his breastplate began to turn with a painful grating noise. His armor opened to reveal a pitch-black mouth of a cannon, which he leveled at Chang Gung. Chang Gung hadn't yet figured out how to coexist peacefully with these windfire wheels strapping to his legs when he heard a whirring noise. He instinctively threw himself forward as a scorching heat seared across his back. Flying gravel pelted down on him like a hurricane of steel nails. It was all he could do to cover his head with his battered sword. The people of the Central Plains would never strap a miniature cannon to the breastplate of their armor. The powerful recoil from firing such a weapon was enough to shatter bone. Only the barbarians, with their more naturally robust physique, dared to fight in this manner. Some said the Black Iron Battalion's success in decimating the 18 barbarian tribes all those years ago was only due to their unfair advantage. After all, the nomadic barbarians were unable to fabricate their own armor. Now, on top of the violet gold that flowed beneath thousands of kilometers of their grasslands, they had somehow obtained the armor they lacked. How could they possibly resign themselves to subjugation by the sheep-like people of the Central Plains? Right now, however, the young Chang Gung had no time to consider such a terrifying prospect. Back when Shen Xiansheng, General Shen, taught him how to maintain a suit of armor, he had once mentioned that there was a limited amount of space in the armor to equip a miniature cannon. As a consequence, the cooling cylinders that prevented the cannon from overheating were not particularly effective. To prevent the user from being burned alive, there was a cooling off period of roughly the amount of time it took to burn a stick of incense. The mouth of the miniature cannon locked automatically during this interval. Since the cannon had just fired, Chang Gung had a bit of room to breathe. The barbarian soldier bellowed in stilted Chinese, "Run, little insect! Scared to death! Run!" Chang Gung's eyes darkened with focus. He performed a smooth turn at the foot of the wall, his movements flowing like water. He lunged back toward the pursuing barbarian. Not expecting the boy to act so recklessly, the warrior was taken by surprise and instinctively tried to hack at him with his sword. The barbarian soldier's heavy armor was nearly 2 times the height of the youth, so its lower half formed a natural blind spot. Chang Gung bent backwards, sticking close to the ground, and ducked under the swing of the barbarian's blade. His steel greaves threw sparks as they scraped furiously against the stone slabs underfoot. Chang Gung hurled the useless steel sword at the barbarian soldier, striking him squarely in the back. The warrior instinctively attempted to dodge, but at that very moment, Chang Gung pressed a hand to his iron cuff. A spinning silk dart shot out like a flick of a snake's tongue and pierced the barbarian's heavy armor as easily as a knife cutting through a melon. The silk dart punctured the heavy armor's golden meridian, causing the meticulously constructed armor to immediately freeze in place. To prevent the suit from exploding and killing its wearer due to the violet gold leakage, the heavy armor initiated its self-preservation protocol and promptly locked down all the joints from the arms to the lower back. Chang Gung was just as surprised. He had only been trying his luck and hadn't expected the iron cuff that Shen Shiliu gave him as a toy to be such an incredible weapon. At a time like this, if the wearer of the heavy armor had their wits about them, they ought to immediately remove their armor while they could, then get back to killing the enemy. After all, even without heavy armor, how could such a powerfully built warrior possibly lose to 2 half-grown children? But although the barbarian tribes managed to get their hands on some armor, it was obvious that they had yet to master these iron monsters. The moment his heavy armor stopped moving, the barbarian soldier was stupefied and tried to break open the locking mechanism with brute force. No matter how blessed the physique, how could the body of a mere mortal defy the power of a suit of heavy armor? The struggling barbarian lost his balance, collapsing in a heap. Making a split-second decision, Chang Gung stepped forward without hesitation and set his steel greaves to maximum power. He took careful aim and stomped down viciously on the gold tank next to the miniature cannon at the back of the warrior's armor. Even the most dilapidated leg armor could smash a 6-centimeter thick slab of stone to pieces. The gold tank burst open with a crack. At the same time, Chang Gung's leg went numb. He had stumped with too much power, and the recoil on his own leg hurt so badly he wondered whether he'd broken any bone. Gritting his teeth, the youth turned and retreated on his remaining good leg with a flip. And not a moment too soon. The barbarian soldier's ruptured gold tank exploded, splattering the pulverized remnants of the barbarian tribesmen head everywhere. Chang'e was unable to avoid the spray completely and ended up partially covered in bits of red and white brain matter. Favoring one leg, he expressionlessly wiped his face clean of blood. Despite standing in the middle of such terrifying carnage, he wasn't scared at all. Perhaps Xiu-niang had been right to call him a freak of nature. Incredibly, Gu Pengxiao managed to pull through at the most crucial moment. He was shaking like a leaf, but his brain was still working. Da Ge, he called out to Chang'e. Let's hurry and find some place to hide. I'll take you to my dad's cellar. Chang'e took only a single step forward before the excruciating pain in his leg made him collapse with a muffled groan. Cold sweat ran down his body in rivulets. Gu Pengxiao sprinted over right away, heaving Chang'e onto his back with a yell. Although he was still a child, he was already impressively plump. When he ran, the shiny white fat on his body quivered like a giggling maiden, a counterpoint to Gu Pengxiao's own panting breaths. But even as he gasped for air, he solemnly declared his loyalty. Da Ge, they murdered my parents. You saved my life. So from now on, I'll follow you. I'll do whatever you tell me to. Let's kill all these barbarian bastards. As he finished speaking, his voice broke, collapsing into a sob. Chang'e could no longer grip that useless sword with his weary hands. He allowed it to fall to the ground with a muffled thud. The muscles in his arms spasmed as he mustered a wretched smile and joked to Gu Pengxiao. What would I want you around for? Can I eat you if there's a famine? At the very least, I can help you wash your feet, Gu Pengxiao responded. Chang'e's ears twitched. He heard an ominous rustling noise and hissed at Gu Pengxiao. Shh! Gu Pengxiao rambled on. My mom always said that the feet I washed were the cleanest. Every time I washed my dad's feet, they'd look whiter than steamed buns. The little poker's rambling ground to a halt. He took 2 shaky steps back. At the end of the alleyway, a barbarian warrior wearing a dazzling suit of heavy armor was slowly making his way toward them. Chapter 10. Gu Yuan. Something inside Chang'e's mouth was bleeding. He tasted the sickly sweet tang of blood at the slightest purse of his lips. Demonstrating a surprising awareness of the severity of their situation, Gu Pengxiao clutched tight to Chang'e's sleeve. His hands were clammy with cold sweat, but despite his extreme fastidiousness, Chang'e was too preoccupied to shake him off just then. The 2 boys were like a pair of cubs cornered in a blind alley, struggling to bare their immature fangs. The figure at the end of the alleyway raised his hand and pushed his visor up, revealing a handsome face of a man in his late 30s. His cheeks were thin, and the shadows lurking within his deep-set eyes seemed to reflect the vast central plains. His gaze as he looked down at Chang'e from above was complicated. Longing lay therein, as well as a touch of pride, and this briefly gave him the appearance of someone brimming with human compassion. But that thin sliver of compassion was ultimately swallowed whole by the deep hatred in those eyes. Like a red thread buried in the boundless snow beyond the pass, it vanished in an instant. The loud rumble of armored steel rose and fell as soldiers in the same blindingly bright heavy armor landed one after another, until over 20 stood behind the man. The next instant, there came a rustle of wind from behind Chang'e. Just as he was about to turn his head, a hand landed on his shoulder, stopping him. The newcomer was Shen Yi in his black carapace. Stained with a new coat of blood, the black iron encasing Shen Yi's body seemed all the more bleak. Gu Pengxiao's eyes widened so much they nearly rolled out of their sockets. Shen Xiansheng. Turning aside, Chang'e spat out a mouthful of blood. That's a general of the Black Iron Battalion and a member of the Marquis of Anding's retinue. You should address him with more respect. Gu Pengxiao's tongue twisted itself into a ball of twine as every piece of flesh on his plump body stuttered in unison. The Marquis of Anding? Guilt-ridden, Shen Yi reached toward Gu Pengxiao with a black iron encased hand. The hand was the size of the boy's head and covered in gore. Gu Pengxiao squeezed his eyes shut and shrank back, but that iron hand merely cupped the back of his head with a touch softer than a feather landing. It didn't break so much as a single strand of hair on his head. Shun Yi stepped in front of the youths, blocking them from view. Then, holding his position, he turned toward the man at the end of the alleyway. I've heard that the head wolf of the 18 Xianlang tribes, King Getu, has an extraordinary son named Jialai, the barbarian responded mildly. In the language of the Central Plains, it means Yinghuo, the planet Mars. Greetings, Crown Prince Jialai Yinghuo. Gripping his wind slasher in one hand, Shen Xiansheng made a fist with the other and placed it before his chest, offering the barbarian's customary greeting. Tell me your name, Demon Crow, said the barbarian prince. I am merely an insignificant soldier. My name is unfit to be uttered by your noble mouth. Shen Yi smiled briefly, then asked in that soft, scholarly, and eminently reasonable way of his. It has been over a decade since the 18 northern tribes declared allegiance to Great Liang, and in that time we have shared friendly diplomatic relations. The payment of tribute and exchange of commerce has always been peaceful. I do not believe that Great Liang has treated your people unfairly. So, may I ask why your soldiers have appeared uninvited to draw weapons on the defenseless women and children of our nation? Gupeng Xiao was flabbergasted. Earlier that morning, Shun Xiansheng had been wearing his ridiculous apron, cursing as he puttered about the stove. Now, standing alone in his somber black carapace before a contingent of barbarian soldiers, he seemed unshakable, a man who would forge courageously ahead in the face of overwhelming odds. The barbarian prince met Shun Yi's eyes. He scoffed softly, then offered an insincere smile before returning his gaze to Chang'eng. Speaking fluently in the official language of Great Liang, he said, On my way here, my brother reported meeting members of the Black Iron Battalion all the way out in this border town. I thought they were scaremongering, but I see now that it's true. In that case, could the other rumor be true as well? Is the son of the goddess who was seized by the emperor of the Central Plains really hidden there? Chang'eng's heart thudded fiercely in his chest. The barbarian prince examined Chang'eng's face until it seemed he couldn't bear to look at him any longer. The hulking warrior tilted his head back slightly to look up. Veiled with clouds, the overcast sky was reflected in the abyss of his eyes. He murmured to some god in the firmament. The goddess of our 18 celestial wolf tribes is the pure spirit of the grassland. All living creatures who lay eyes on her bow their heads, and even the heavenly winds seek to kiss the hem of her skirt. The land on which she sings and dances flocks with cattle and sheep in the coming year and flourishes with lush vegetation, the numberless blooming flowers stretching to the very edge of the eternal. There was a peculiar rhythm in his words, as though he was humming a shepherd's song from the grasslands. You Central Plains folk, the barbarian prince said, occupied our pasture lands, hollowed out the heart's blood of the earth, and stole away our goddess. And now you ask me why we have come. Is this question absurd? Your distinguished nation has been led by virtuous leaders for many years. They enlightened regions of people during their rule, but in the end, did you only learn their thievery? You may be a member of the Black Iron Battalion, but you're all alone here. I advise you to step aside and hand the little mixed-breed bastard over to me. I will commit him to the flames to seek atonement from the eternal sky and appease the wrath of the defiled goddess. Truly, I cannot stand to look at his face any longer. Gupeng Xiao's mind had been a muddle since the conversation began, but upon hearing these words, he finally managed to stitch together some bits and pieces of the conversation. Breathlessly, he asked, "Dage, the little mixed, the person he's talking about, is that you?" Chang'eng said numbly, with an air of misery, "Can you please stop talking?" So what your highness means to say is, Shun Yi shook his head helplessly, I see the guilty part is crying thief first. Very well. There's no point in the two of us retreading the facts of the Northern Expedition 14 years ago. If it's a fight that you seek, let us begin. His words landed with the finality of an iron nail hitting the ground. The low walls enclosing the narrow alleyway were flattened in an instant by those towering suits of heavy armor. The two ranks of northern barbarian warriors split up and surrounded Shen Yi and Chang'e, approaching with murderous intent. Shen Yi unsheathed a dagger and handed it to Chang'e. "Please be careful, Your Highness." Though Shen Xianxiang spoke with utmost politeness, his methods were vicious. The words had barely left his mouth before he struck the first blow. A 3-meter-long jet of steam erupted from the black plate of his black carapace armor, and the wind slasher shot out of his hand with a shrill rasp like a flashing cyclone. His strike caught the 3 closest barbarian warriors unaware, shattering the gold tanks over their hearts in one fell swoop and causing their suits to lock them in place. The barbarian prince led the charge with an ear-splitting roar, a gust of sweltering wind rising in his wake. Even as he met the attack without the slightest hesitation, Shen Yi shouted to Chang'e and Ge Pengxiao, "Run!" The black carapace armor of the Black Iron Battalion was an exquisite weapon indeed, perhaps a little too exquisite. It was said that the black carapace was some 20 kilograms lighter than an ordinary suit of heavy armor. Shen Yi already resembled a weak scholar and wasn't nearly as robust as the barbarian prince. Raising his wind slasher with both hands, he managed to block his opponent's thunderous strike, but was forced to take several steps back. As the 2 suits of heavy armor clashed, every one of the low walls, courtyards, and stone houses surrounding them collapsed into untidy heaps. Not even the giant, century-old trees were spared from destruction. The barbarian prince shouted, "Seize the little mixed-breed brat!" Having received their orders, several heavy-armored barbarian soldiers moved at once. Snow-white steam filled the air as they intercepted that pair of youths with only 3 working legs between them. Chang'e held his dagger at an angle before him. His injured leg, unable to bear any weight, hung limply to the side. The clamoring beat inside his chest made him feel his heart was about to explode, and his childish face was grim. The aggressive wolfishness hidden deep within his blood had been forced to the surface during this face-off with the barbarian warriors. So what if this so-called goddess had a mysterious mother? Even if she was, what kind of bizarre ritual demanded a son be sacrificed to his mother at a burning altar? Standing amid the clamor and the dust, Ge Pengxiao wiped away his snot and asked stupidly, "Dage, are you really a highness? Doesn't that mean you're moving up in the world?" "Like hell I'm moving up in the world," Chang'e retorted. "They've got the wrong person, and we're about to die. Shouldn't you be running away?" Ge Pengxiao puffed out his chest. "I won't run. I want to follow my Dage." "Oh, crap!" A pair of barbarian soldiers lunged at them from either side. One of them grabbed Ge Pengxiao, who had spoken with such boldness only seconds ago, and hoisted him overhead, intending to dash his brains out against the ground. But Ge Pengxiao was blessed with sharp eyes and agile hands. Flailing like a puppy on the brink of death, he grasped the branches of a nearby tree and, with a burst of inhuman strength that came from staring death in the eye, managed to clamber his way into the tree. Inhuman as his strength might be, his pants were still made of mortal cloth. With a ripping sound, they were torn away. Whether it was out of resourcefulness or abject fear, who could say? But upon witnessing the destruction of his pants, Ge Pengxiao seized the opportunity and emptied a full bladder's worth of virgin boy urine right into the heavy-armored barbarian's face. It just so happened that the warrior had pushed his visor up. He received the offering in full, wasting not a single drop. The barbarian soldier flew into a mad rage. With a furious roar, he flung his iron fist outwards, determined to beat this little brat to death. Yet to his surprise, he suddenly lost control of his legs. Chang'e, it turned out, had managed to evade the enemy's attacks and slip through. While the barbarian was frozen under the tree, he took careful aim and jabbed his dagger into the joint of the warrior's steel greaves at a cunning angle. As expected of a weapon forged by the Black Iron Battalion, the dagger was razor sharp, easily slicing through one side of the protective steel armor covering the warrior's legs. The barbarian soldier lost his balance, falling to his knees and blocking his compatriots completely. Ge Pengxiao scurried up the tree like a chubby monkey and vaulted with nimble feet onto the neighboring rooftop. He valiantly picked up a brick from a nearby section of wall and called out to Chang'e, Dage, get out of the way! White steam jetted out from the soles of Changeng's feet, but didn't have time to stand up before the steel greaves strapped to his leg dragged him some dozen meters away. Moments after the warning was issued, a large slab of stone fell from the sky and smashed the barbarian's helmet with a resounding crash so loud it seemed to reverberate for 3 days and nights. "How dare you bastards pants me!" Xiao shouted. "I'll show you!" Changeng was covered in dirt from being dragged along the ground. Just as he was about to struggle onto his remaining good leg, a weight clamped down over his nape. A giant iron hand descended from the skies, lifting him by the scuff of the neck. Changeng reflexively reached for his iron cuff, but that barbarian soldier didn't give him a chance to fight back, intending to slam him directly into a wall. Shunyi had his hands full fending off the barbarian prince. He was too far away to help. There came the shrill whinny of a horse, and the gleaming iron arrow shot through the sky with inescapable force. Punching through the thick steel plates of armor, it pinned the barbarian holding Changeng against the low section of wall. Unable to bear the weight of the heavy armor, the low wall collapsed. Changeng landed in a pile of wreckage, somewhat worse for wear. Hearing the piercing screech of a bird of prey, he glanced up and saw a pair of enormous black shadows encircling the sky. The range of their long brows and iron arrows high above engulfed the barbarian prince's 18 iron warriors. The barbarian prince lifted his head, glaring so fiercely he nearly tore his eyes out of his sockets. "Black Hawks!" "That they are," said a voice a short distance away. "Long time no see. The 3 divisions of the Black Iron Battalion pays their respects to your highness." Changeng's entire body jolted at the familiarity of that voice. Kneeling amongst broken debris, he turned and stared in disbelief at the man in light armor who had arrived on horseback. This man was wearing the lightest class of armor, also known as light pelt. An armor specifically designed for riding, it weighed less than 15 kilograms in total. He wore no visor and held his helmet carelessly in one hand, revealing a face that had once invaded Changeng's dreams. The cinnabar beauty mark at the corner of his eye burned a scorching red. Xiu swayed slightly where he was perched on the wall and nearly tumbled off. He pinched himself sharply on the thigh. "My God! Aren't you Uncle Shirliu?" "That's right, my dear little nephew." Shirliu blithely nudged his steed forward, as if the enemy ranks were beneath his notice. He haughtily drew a wind slasher from his waist, which he used to push aside the body of the barbarian soldier. Then he turned back to Xiu and heckled him good-naturedly. "Little brat, what are you doing swinging your sausage around like that in public? At least find yourself a leaf or something." Embarrassed, Xiu hastily reached down to cover himself. Changeng stared at him unwaveringly, forgetting for a time where he was. Meeting his eyes, Shirliu dismounted from his horse and bent slightly to offer Changeng his hand. "Your subject, Gu Yuan, has arrived late. Please forgive me, Your Highness." All right, everyone. That concludes the reading of the prologue of Stars of Chaos Volume 1. And I take back what I said at the end of the previous video. Things went from 0 to like infinity real quick. Oh my God. I'm totally interested now. Things went from so peaceful and just like ordinary chubby little kid and a good-natured little boy who has a crappy mother to like suddenly, what the freaking frack friddlin'? Oh my God, this is good. This is good. I love when things get intense out of nowhere. I love fighting and all that kind of stuff. So Stars of Chaos has officially captured my heart now. Also, can I just say, reading the chapter of Xiu-niang and I think it was called Curse. Look, I definitely understand the crap that she'd went through, you know, being raped and stuff is totally not cool. And I can only imagine the psychosis or how psychotic she became from all that. But my heart officially hurts for Changeng because that woman is a lunatic. It's not even her son. And she tried to, she tried to kill him on multiple occasions.
and then was like, I changed my mind. I don't know. I feel so bad for him. I'm not going to say anything else because I'm in shock and I feel like I just need a moment to myself. I will see you guys next time when we start Arc 1, Order.